You are a pathetic wife and a useless mother. My husband's voice cut through the backyard, freezing 43 relatives mid-laughter. The humiliation was deafening. But what my daughter did next, it flipped our entire world upside down. I'm Rachel and I'm sharing my story with you that'll give you chills. Comment below where you're watching from, because today's story will make you question everything you think you know about revenge. Let me take you back 6 months to show you how I ended up in that backyard about to uncover the most shocking betrayal of my life. For 12 years I thought I had built the perfect life. A cozy suburban home with flower boxes I tended every morning before work. A successful career as a marketing director. A daughter who made my heart burst with pride daily. And my husband Trevor? He seemed like the ideal partner. Charming at parties, successful in his accounting firm, the guy who remembered anniversaries and brought flowers, just because. Everyone told me how lucky I was. Trevor's such a catch, my sister would gush. You two are relationship goals, friends would comment on our posts. But perfection, I learned, is often just a pretty mask hiding something rotten underneath. What I discovered about Trevor's secret life. What my own daughter had been observing behind my back for months while I was completely clueless. No one could have prepared me for that level of betrayal. The cracks started showing 8 months before that reunion. Trevor began coming home later, claiming his firm was swamped. He'd walk through the door at 10 p.m., kiss my forehead with lips that tasted like mint gum, and disappear into his home office for important calls. You wouldn't understand the complexity of what I'm dealing with, he'd say whenever I asked. Your little marketing campaigns are cute, but this is real business. Those dismissive comments became more frequent. When our 18-year-old daughter Mia made honor roll in her senior year, he barely looked up from his phone. When I got promoted to senior director, he shrugged and said, "Finally caught up to where you should have been years ago." The emotional distance felt like trying to hug smoke. There was nothing solid left to hold on to. But I pushed through because that's what good wives do, right? I kept the house immaculate, prepared his favorite meals, and smiled when he introduced me to his colleagues as just the wife at company events. I told myself he was stressed, that things would get better once his workload lightened. But here's what I didn't know. What would have changed everything if I'd discovered it sooner? Mia had started paying attention to his behavior more closely than I realized. At the time, I thought she was just focused on college applications. What I didn't know was that she'd already found something that made her blood run cold. Something that would later save my life in ways I couldn't imagine. The reunion was supposed to be our fresh start. His extended family only gathered every few years, and I'd spent weeks planning my contributions. Homemade everything, carefully coordinated outfits, even a slideshow of our best moments. I should have known something was wrong when Trevor seemed genuinely excited about the reunion for the first time in years. He kept checking his appearance in mirrors, bought new clothes, and actually volunteered to help with planning. But why was he so eager to attend? What was he planning that made this gathering so important to him? The twisted reason would make my humiliation hurt even more, because this wasn't random cruelty. This was calculated destruction designed to serve a very specific purpose. But while I was making excuses for him, someone else in my house was noticing patterns that would ruin him. The morning of the reunion, everything felt electric with possibility. Mia looked beautiful in her sundress, Trevor seemed relaxed for once, and I'd managed to create what looked like a magazine-worthy spread of appetizers. The drive to his brother's house was filled with actual conversation. About Mia's college plans, a vacation we might take, little dreams that felt suddenly reachable. But the moment we pulled into the driveway, Trevor's demeanor shifted. His jaw tightened, his eyes went cold, and when his sister-in-law came to greet us, he practically pushed past me to hug her first. "There's my beautiful family," he announced loudly as we entered the backyard. 40-plus relatives turned to wave, and I felt that familiar flutter of pride. This was it, our moment to shine together. For 3 hours, everything seemed normal. Trevor worked the crowd like a politician, regaling everyone with stories from work, complimenting the women, backslapping the men. I floated between conversations, refilling drinks, checking on food, playing the perfect hostess role I'd mastered over the years. But Mia stayed close to me, which was unusual. Normally she'd be off with her cousins, but today she seemed tense, almost protective. When I asked if she was okay, she just squeezed my hand and said, "I love you, Mom. Remember that." The comment struck me as odd, but I had no idea what was coming. Because what Mia knew, what she'd been preparing for, would turn this family gathering into the most explosive confrontation any of us had ever witnessed. Rachel, get over here. I hurried over with my tray of fresh deviled eggs, smiling at the circle of his relatives who'd gathered around him. He was in full storytelling mode, gesturing wildly with a beer in one hand. So I was telling everyone about your little meltdown last week, he said, his tone light but his eyes sharp as glass. When you completely lost it because I forgot to pick up milk. My stomach dropped. That wasn't what happened at all. I'd simply asked him to grab milk on his way home, and when he forgot, I'd gone out myself. No meltdown, no drama. Just a normal married couple miscommunication. Trevor, that's not. Oh, here we go, he interrupted, and several people chuckled. See what I mean? She's always correcting me, always nagging about something. The circle of relatives grew quiet. I felt my cheeks burning, but I forced a laugh. It's like living with my mother, except my mother actually knows how to cook. But what came next would shatter everything I thought I knew about my marriage. Because this wasn't just a moment of cruelty. This was a performance. And I was about to discover exactly why Trevor needed an audience for my destruction. Honey, maybe we should. Should what? Should I pretend you're not exactly what you are? His voice rose, cutting through the ambient noise of the party like a knife. The entire backyard began to quiet, conversations stopping mid-sentence. Should I lie to my family about how pathetic you've become? Children paused their games. Even the neighbors peeked over the fence. You are a pathetic wife and a useless mother, he continued, his words deliberate and cruel. Look around, Rachel. Look at these women. My cousins, my sister-in-law. The deviled eggs crashed to the ground as my hands went completely numb. They take care of themselves. They contribute to their marriages. They don't spend their days playing with finger paints and calling it a career. 43 people stared at me. With pity. Satisfaction. And then his mother smiled. A cold, victorious smile. She'd been waiting for this moment for years. But then I heard footsteps. Quick, determined footsteps across the grass. That's enough. Mia's voice cut through the silence like a sword. My 18-year-old daughter stood beside me, her phone held high, recording everything. And then my daughter said 7 words that detonated everything. Actually, keep talking, Trevor, she said, her voice steady despite the tears streaming down her face. Tell everyone how pathetic Mom is. Tell them how useless she is. The crowd leaned in, sensing something explosive was about to happen. But while you're at it, maybe explain to Aunt Linda why you've been texting her husband Mark for the past 6 months. But that wasn't even the worst part. What my daughter revealed about Trevor's other secret relationships, and the real reason he'd orchestrated this public humiliation, would make everyone in that backyard question everything they thought they knew about him. The silence that followed Mia's words was so complete I could hear my own heartbeat thundering in my ears. Trevor's face went from red with anger to white as fresh snow in the space of a single breath. Mia, what are you talking about? Linda's voice cracked across the yard. Mark stood beside her, his face equally pale. My daughter's hands shook, but her voice remained strong. I've been paying attention to Dad's behavior for months. Taking secret calls, hiding his phone, coming home with cologne that isn't his. She looked directly at Trevor, and I saw something in her eyes I'd never seen before, cold, calculated fury. The evidence was right there in plain sight. He got careless and left his laptop open last Tuesday night. Trevor lunged toward her. Give me that phone right now. But Mia was ready. She stepped back, still recording, and her voice rose so everyone could hear. 6 months of messages. Pictures. Hotel receipts. The gasps from the crowd sounded like wind through a cemetery. And it's not just Mark, is it, Dad? But what she said next would reveal the most twisted part of Trevor's deception. And explain exactly why he'd chosen this moment, this audience, to destroy me so publicly. Want to tell everyone about your other boyfriend, Daniel, from your office? Linda collapsed into a lawn chair, her hands covering her face. Mark stood frozen, his mouth opening and closing like a fish out of water. You're lying, Trevor snarled, but his voice lacked conviction. You don't know what you're talking about. Room 314 at the Marriott downtown, Mia continued, her phone steady despite her tears. Every Thursday for the past 4 months. She paused, letting that sink in, then delivered the blow that would explain everything. Daniel's the one who's been calling during dinner, isn't he? The client, who needs so much attention after hours? The same Daniel who's been pressuring you to leave Mom so you two can be together openly. The final piece of the puzzle clicked into place with devastating clarity. This whole performance, humiliating Mom in front of everyone, this was your grand exit strategy, wasn't it? Make her look so pathetic that no one would question why you left her. I felt like I was watching this unfold from outside my own body. The husband I'd been making excuses for, the man I'd been blaming myself for disappointing, he was gay. And not just gay but carrying on multiple affairs while systematically destroying my self-worth to cover his tracks. But the cruelest part? He'd planned to use my public humiliation as justification for abandoning our family. And there was something else. Something Mia had discovered that made this betrayal even more sinister than I could have imagined. Trevor made another grab for Mia's phone, but his cousin Jake stepped between them. "Back off, man. Let her talk." "Mom." Mia turned to me, her young face etched with pain I never should have let her witness. "He left his laptop open 3 weeks ago. I walked by and saw the messages by accident. After that I couldn't unsee the signs. Late nights, secret calls, receipts he thought he'd hidden." She pulled up photos on her phone. Screenshot after screenshot of explicit messages, hotel confirmations, even photos Trevor had sent to his lovers. "But that wasn't even the worst thing I found," she said, her voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more weight than shouting. "There were other messages, Mom. Messages about you. I started taking pictures because I knew you'd need proof someday. I couldn't watch him destroy you anymore." My hands started shaking. "What kind of messages about me?" "He was ranking you," she said, tears streaming down her face. "Rating your appearance, your cooking, your intelligence. Sending screenshots of your texts to him and letting Daniel and Mark make fun of how clingy and pathetic you were." The world tilted sideways. It wasn't just that he was cheating, he was using me as entertainment for his lovers. But the evidence she'd collected, the careful documentation she'd been building while I thought she was just being a protective daughter, went far deeper than anyone in that backyard could have imagined. "There's more," she said, scrolling to another folder. "He wasn't just cheating on you, Mom. He was planning to frame you. This is why he's been so cruel to you," she continued. "Every time he called you worthless, every time he made you feel small, he was building a narrative for his exit. He was going to claim you had become abusive, that you were unstable, that he feared for his safety." I stared at her in horror. "What?" "He was documenting fake incidents, Mom. Taking pictures of dishes in the sink and claiming you'd thrown them at him. Recording you when you were upset about his behavior and editing the videos to make you look unhinged. The manipulation wasn't just emotional. It was a systematic campaign to rewrite reality." Linda stood up slowly, her face a mask of pure rage. "Mark? Is this true?" Mark's silence was answer enough. But I barely heard the chaos that erupted around us. Linda screaming at her husband, Trevor's mother demanding explanations, relatives choosing sides and forming angry clusters across the yard. All I could focus on was my daughter, this brave, fierce young woman who had protected me when I couldn't protect myself. "How long have you known?" I whispered to her. "Long enough to document everything," she whispered back, showing me her phone. "I've got it all backed up in 3 different places. Every message, every photo, every lie." She scrolled to another folder and what I saw made my knees weak. "And Mom? I've been recording his treatment of you for weeks. Video after video. Trevor belittling me in our kitchen, dismissing my work, making cruel comments about my appearance when he thought she wasn't listening. Months of emotional abuse, all captured in high definition. He destroyed our family," she said, her voice breaking for the first time. "But I wasn't going to let him destroy you too." What happened next was like watching a controlled demolition in slow motion. Trevor's carefully constructed public image crumbled piece by piece, and I had front row seats to the most satisfying destruction I'd ever witnessed. Within hours, the videos had spread through the family WhatsApp groups. By evening, screenshots of Trevor's messages were circulating on Facebook. His accounting firm's partners received anonymous emails with detailed documentation of his affairs, particularly damaging since the firm marketed itself as family values focused. But what they also received was something that made Trevor's situation infinitely worse. Evidence of embezzlement. "I found the real reason he was working late," Mia told me later that week. "He wasn't just having affairs. He was stealing money from client accounts to pay for his double life. But the real genius of my daughter's approach became clear over the following days. She hadn't just collected evidence of Trevor's affairs. She documented a criminal enterprise. The hotel charges weren't just paid with our money. Some came from accounts that weren't his. Client retainer fees that should have been in trust accounts had been funding his secret life. He thought he was so clever, Mia explained as we watched the news report about his arrest. But every time he transferred money, he left a digital trail. I just had to know where to look. The theft hadn't been random, it was calculated. Trevor had been systematically stealing from elderly clients, knowing they were less likely to scrutinize their statements closely. But here's the part that still gives me chills when I think about it. The level of attention to detail. The months of careful observation. The strategic thinking that went into every piece of evidence she'd gathered. My 18-year-old daughter had been connecting the dots in ways that would have impressed professional investigators. "I learned organization from watching you work," she told me as we sat in our lawyer's office 3 days later. "I figured if I was going to expose him, I might as well do it thoroughly." The lawyer, a sharp-eyed woman named Patricia Chin, looked through Mia's evidence with obvious admiration. "This is more thorough than most private investigators manage," she said. "Your daughter has a gift for pattern recognition." The immediate consequences were swift and brutal. Trevor's firm put him on administrative leave pending an investigation. Linda filed for separation from Mark. The local newspaper picked up the story when Trevor's business partners tried to claim his behavior was irrelevant to his professional conduct. But then the FBI got involved. "White-collar crime unit," the agent explained when she showed up at our door. "We've been investigating discrepancies in several trust accounts at your husband's firm. Your daughter's evidence confirms what we suspected. Trevor wasn't just a cheating husband, he was facing federal charges. Apparently, using company resources to facilitate affairs was very relevant indeed. But the long-term consequences were even more satisfying. The evidence Mia had gathered proved that Trevor had been systematically gaslighting me for months, using psychological manipulation to make me doubt my own worth while he pursued his secret relationships. But more than that, she'd prevented me from becoming the scapegoat for his crimes. The abusive wife narrative he was building would have made me a convenient cover story when the money went missing. "He was going to frame you for the embezzlement too," she explained quietly. "Make it look like you'd been forging his signature, stealing from his clients to fund your shopping addiction. He had fake receipts, doctored bank statements, everything. Without Mia's intervention, I wouldn't just have lost my marriage. I would have lost my freedom. In our state, that pattern of emotional abuse significantly impacted the divorce proceedings. I got the house. I got primary custody of Mia. I got alimony that would let me rebuild my life on my own terms. More importantly, I got my self-respect back." Trevor tried to frame the situation as a mutual breakdown, claiming we'd grown apart, and that his sexuality was irrelevant to our marriage's failure. But Mia's evidence told a different story. One of deliberate cruelty designed to make me feel so worthless I'd never question his behavior or demand better treatment. The divorce was finalized in 4 months. By then, Trevor had lost his job, his reputation, and most of his family's respect. Mark and Linda's marriage imploded spectacularly, with Linda taking half of everything and moving 3 states away. But Trevor had also lost something else, his freedom. The embezzlement charges carried a potential 15-year sentence. The man who'd called me pathetic was now begging his lawyer to negotiate a plea deal. Meanwhile, I was discovering what life felt like without someone constantly tearing me down, and without the threat of false criminal charges hanging over my head. 6 months after that devastating family reunion, I stood in my kitchen making breakfast for Mia before her final semester of high school. Sunlight streamed through windows I'd finally gotten around to replacing, and the smell of fresh coffee mixed with the sound of my daughter's laughter as she scrolled through college acceptance letters. "Stanford wants me," she announced casually, as if this wasn't the most incredible news in the world. "Of course they do," I said, flipping pancakes with a steady hand. "You're brilliant." "I learned from the best," she replied, and the pride in her voice made my chest swell. This was our new normal. Quiet mornings, honest conversations, a house filled with peace instead of tension. I'd been promoted again at work. Apparently, my productivity skyrocketed once I wasn't spending all my emotional energy managing Trevor's moods and criticisms. The doorbell rang and Mia jumped up to answer it. "Package for you, Mom." I opened the box to find a framed certificate. My first place award for the regional marketing campaign that had launched last month. The campaign Trevor had dismissed as finger painting had won industry recognition and brought our company 3 major new clients. "Dad texted me yesterday," Mia said quietly, settling back at the kitchen table. My stomach tightened. "What did he say?" "He wants to have dinner. Wants to explain his side and rebuild our relationship." She made air quotes with obvious disdain. "What did you tell him?" "That he had 12 years to be a good father and husband, and he chose to spend that time lying and destroying the people who loved him." He shrugged. "I told him I'd consider talking to him again when he figured out how to apologize without making excuses." I sat down across from her, studying this remarkable young woman who'd saved us both. "Are you okay with that decision?" "Mom, he called you pathetic and useless in front of 40 people. He spent months making you believe you weren't good enough." Her eyes flashed with the same fire they'd shown that day in the backyard. "I'm not okay with that. I'll never be okay with that. But he's still your father." "No," she interrupted. "A father protects his family. He builds them up. He loves them enough to be honest even when honesty is hard." She reached across the table and took my hand. "You did that for me every day of my life." "He never did." The weight of her words settled over me like a warm blanket. For months, I'd worried that I'd damaged her by not leaving sooner, by not recognizing the signs of Trevor's deception. But sitting there in our sunlit kitchen, watching her navigate complex emotions with wisdom beyond her years, I realized something profound. I hadn't failed her. Together we'd survived something that could have destroyed us, and we'd come out stronger. A year after the reunion, I received an invitation that made me laugh out loud. Trevor's brother was getting divorced, and his soon-to-be ex-wife wanted to invite me to her liberation party. "I know it's weird," Melissa wrote in her text, "but watching you stand up for yourself at the reunion inspired me to finally leave Jake. Turns out he's been cheating for years too. Want to celebrate our freedom together." I didn't go to the party, but I sent a bottle of champagne with a note. "To new beginnings and the courage to demand better." That evening, Mia and I sat on our back deck, watching the sunset paint our garden in shades of gold and orange. She was home for spring break from Stanford, full of stories about her classes and friends and the future she was building. "I've been thinking about that day at the reunion," she said, leaning back in her chair. "Any regrets?" I asked. "Only one." She grinned at me. "I wish I'd started paying attention sooner." We both laughed, and the sound carried across our quiet neighborhood like music. "Mom, can I ask you something?" "Always." "That flash drive I found in Dad's office. The one with all the financial records showing how he'd been moving money to pay for his affairs? The one that helped you get a better settlement in the divorce?" I nodded. That flash drive had been crucial evidence, showing that Trevor had been systematically hiding assets and using our joint funds to finance his double life. "I never told you the whole story about how I found it," Mia continued, her eyes twinkling with mischief. "Remember how he always said I was too curious for my own good?" "What did you do?" "Well, after I accidentally saw those messages on his laptop, I realized he was probably hiding other things too. So I started looking in places he thought were safe. His desk drawers, his briefcase, even that old filing cabinet in the garage." She grinned wider. "I didn't just catch him cheating, Mom. I found evidence of him trying to hide money in accounts he thought you'd never discover. The anonymous tips to his firm about his fraudulent expense reports? That was me too." My mouth fell open. "Mia Catherine Morrison, are you telling me you single-handedly exposed his entire web of lies?" "Baby." She tried to look innocent and failed completely. "But hey, it worked, didn't it?" The scope of what my 18-year-old daughter had accomplished hit me like a tidal wave. She hadn't just caught her father cheating. She'd exposed a man twice her age, methodically, strategically, completely. More importantly, I'd learned something about myself that no one could ever take away. I was not pathetic. I was not useless. I was a mother who'd raised a daughter smart enough to outsmart a predator and brave enough to stand up for what was right. As we sat there watching the stars appear, I realized something that made me smile. I'd stopped crying for what I'd lost. I'd started celebrating what I'd survived. The woman who'd stood in that backyard a year ago, humiliated and broken, was gone. In her place sat someone who knew her worth, demanded respect, and had raised a daughter who would never accept less than she deserved. I didn't just raise a daughter. I raised a strategist who exposed a man twice her age. And together we rebuilt a life he could never touch. And it was absolutely perfect. Thanks for listening to today's story, everyone. If this resonated with you, please hit that like button and subscribe for more real-life stories. And remember, you are never as alone as you think you are, and you are always stronger than you know. See you next time.